were at DWI 3 within, 2 months or something like that?
No, I got them all in 45 days.
What?
Oh, yeah.
You had 5 DWIs in 45 days. So tell me, what was growing up like for you, Jamie?
Well, basically what had transpired was my mother and father split up due to his alcoholism. And so my mom's family came down to Texas, which is where I was born, grabbed us and moved us up to PA. And so growing up was like really essentially my mom navigating like being a single mom and then like bouncing between either my grandmother or my grandfather's house. Outside of that, I can say that I did feel odd growing up. I'm not going to say, I guess I did feel different from others, but I really didn't become like conscious of that. I probably till like I was maybe 7 or 8. I would say 7 or 8. At which point, like between like moving between like school districts and all of that, I just really was a really isolated kid. I liked to be by myself. So I guess that's kind of weird, but that's what it was like. Until I would say a major change happened again when my mother got into this relationship, which I feel like that is where all terrible tales start, I swear. She got into this relationship with this guy who made false teeth for a living, which is pretty cool. And they were together for 8 years. Now, he was the youngest of like 10 children, and he had gotten into a motor vehicle accident when he was 18, which paralyzed him from the waist down. So I would say I was probably around 8 years old when they got together, and almost 16 when they split up. But he ran a very tight ship. And so what I feel was like any small step out of line, like I would say would lead to like consequences that I didn't think were it didn't fit the crime. I didn't think. You know what I mean? So I become a teenager, all of that jazz, and then eventually they split up, and then my mom goes off to be like a single mom again. But this time she has a 16-year-old, and my brother at the time would have been like 12. And that's when I started acting out. Like once I had that freedom, it was like there was a tight leash on me from like 8 to 16. And once it was no longer there, I just responded accordingly. I started I didn't start smoking weed till probably 17. I was a late bloomer, really. And I didn't start drinking until I was 18. And all of that was purely fear-based. Just because of like my dad and my mom like reiterating to me growing up like, you don't want to end up like your father. And I'm like, well, yeah, it happened anyway. So I get into this relationship. He is big on marijuana, loves it. And so I start trying it. And I get put into like borderline panic attacks every time. It's like I cannot function. I just feel like I gotta go sit in the corner and like drink some water for hours. But I would continue to do it just because he wanted to do it. And I would keep putting myself in these like torturous situations just for that connection. And so what I've explained to others is that like when I was younger, I would get out of my reality through reading fictional books. Harry Potter, The Golden Compass, like these very fairy tale, out in left field books, which I still love. So after the books, like came boys. And then like once I started consuming alcohol, that was it for me. And that's all I wanted to do.
So it's interesting because I've heard many times parents who are, kids who grow up in a household where the parents are very strict, somewhat borderline controlling, the kid then goes off to college, or they're not under the parents' roof anymore.
Yeah.
And then they just get this freedom and they go crazy. It's interesting because, I mean, look, you're a parent. I'm a parent. I have a 5-year-old daughter. And it's that, and for the parents listening, it's like, where do you draw the line being too strict? But you also don't want to allow your kid just to do whatever you want. You have to show them discipline. So it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic in the household and raising kids.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And you really don't know what you're doing. You're really just learning as you go. And so, like, hindsight being 2020, like, I can look back on that time period and be like, nobody knew what the heck they were doing. Like, they were just trying to figure it out. Because I'm in that same, like, predicament. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, what do you do in certain situations? And so I have to, like, call people that I know who have gone through it already and see, like, okay, am I doing too much? Am I not doing enough? Because I think as parents, we mostly feel like we're not doing good enough.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. So I deal with something on a regular basis called father's guilt. And me and my ex-wife, we split up 3 years ago, divorced, I think, like 2.5 years ago. We have a great relationship. We're best of friends. She lives 15 minutes from me down in Florida. We split my daughter 50-50. I could call her on a day that I miss my daughter if I don't have her.
Yeah.
And say, can I come get her? Absolutely, come by and get her. Look, we have a great relationship. We are both very present. We go to her functions together to support our daughter. And someone said, just show up for your child. Like, don't worry about being perfect. Just make sure you are present and showing up for your child. And I do all of those things. However, my thinking, and this is, I call this my alcoholic thinking. I will sit there and say, I'm not a good dad. Like, oh my God, I answered that text an hour ago and she looked at me when I was answering a text and she probably thinks I'm not giving her enough attention. This is where my mind goes.
Worst case scenario, immediately.
Exactly. Worst case scenario every single time. So it's like, what is the right way? What is the wrong way? But I think, not to spoil your story, but you are here because you have, I believe, coming up on 9 years of sobriety?
I just celebrated 9 in May.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
I think when you first get sober, right, the first year is so great. Like, it's so overwhelming in all the greatest ways that, like, you really don't think that anything bad will ever happen ever again now that you're not drinking or using drugs. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like, for me anyway, year 2 and then year 5 and then 8 into 9, terrible.
5 was terrible for me. 2 was tough. 1 was a breeze because you're just like on a pink cloud.
Yeah.
Running through sobriety life, learning everything. So, yeah, no, it gets harder and harder. It's life on life's terms.
Absolutely. And I also feel like I never experienced any serious life situations when I was drinking. It's like higher power, God, source, whatever you want to call it, as soon as I got sober, decided, okay, well, now that you're done with the bullshit, now you get to experience these other things and experience how to walk through them, I guess, more importantly. But that is always something cool, I think, anyway, to look back on.
Yeah. So walk us through, you know, you're dating a guy, he smokes weed, you're smoking weed, you got into drinking pretty significantly. Walk us through, I guess, just the year leading up to, you know, when you started your 9-year sobriety journey. What was your last year of drinking like, and what happened?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because the sobriety date I have now is, like, not the first one. I technically had one before that where I did, like, accumulate the most time I've ever had at that point, which was 8 months. But the year before that looked something like me getting out of state prison, inviting a person who was on the run to live in my mother's basement with me, where I got introduced to heroin. I would say 3 months tops out of being at a state prison, I am being approached by my PO and basically told, like, you're going to treatment. Where I go to treatment at Conewago and Pottsville, which is a state facility. And in my mind, right, and this is crazy. So in my mind, I had told myself that my sobriety date was the date that I got put in the county jail to await my bed date at that rehab, right? But what actually happened was I got into the rehab, and I would say like 30 days in, one of the other girls had like met with their son, who was an adult. It was an older lady, and her son had brought in heroin. And I did use while in the treatment facility. And I just completely like shoved that out of my mind, right? Like as if it never happened. 25 days later, I complete that treatment program. I go to York, Pennsylvania. I go to my first recovery house, which they have them in Florida, but they're called halfways for whatever reason. But in Pennsylvania, a halfway house is like a level of care.
Sober living.
Yeah, sober living. So I go to this recovery house and I'm like scared, feared up. I've never been to a meeting quite like they have in that area. And what I mean by that is like my first meeting is on a Thursday night. I remember who spoke. I remember which meeting it was. I remember how many people were there. And I remember like being filled with anxiety and not talking to a soul. Because like the recovery community there is large. The meeting had, and I'm not making this up, probably 150 people. Easy. And the last meeting I had been to prior to this was in my hometown, which is a rural area where there's like 10 old dudes. And you're supposed to hope and pray, I guess, that you can relate. I start off my journey. I meet a distraction almost immediately in the rooms of AA. That distraction would become my daughter's father. But the 8 months, right, back to that, he ends up relapsing. And I figure out, like, where he is. And I go there with the best of intentions to, like, help him. But what ends up happening is I go into that hotel room and, like, within seconds, I'm drinking. It was an experience. One wouldn't recommend if you're thinking about getting into a relationship, fresh out of rehab, fresh out of whatever. Even if you've had time before, I would say absolutely don't do it. 100% don't do it. Because I was so consumed with that relationship that I was just going through the motions with what the recovery house wanted me to do, like going to meetings, getting a sponsor, all of that, that I was really only half-assing that. Most of my effort was going to the relationship. So one of our friends, and it was the first time I had ever asked for like external help to get into anywhere. So I called one of our mutual friends. I said, hey, can you come here and help me figure out where to go? And that mutual friend got me into my first private insurance funded rehab. And that was May 14th that I went in there, 2015. And I'm going to be honest with you, Kev. I hated it. Was not a fan immediately. And I think it was because the people I was in there with felt as though, from my perception at the time, which I'm not saying is accurate, but it felt in that moment as though everybody was so entitled. Everybody thought that they were better than. And I was like, climbing this ropes course in the woods is not going to keep me sober. Petting these horses is not going to keep me sober. And so one of the days I verbalized this to the then, I believe he was like a yoga guy. That's how I felt. And he was like, well, then what will keep you sober, Jamie? And of course, in my entitled response is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous.
You wise ass.
I know.
So this treatment facility you went in, you went in closed-minded from what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And you are still sober to this day.
Yeah, I left there, AMA.
You left there AMA and then you stayed sober 9 years and
Yeah.
still sober to this day.
Yeah.
What are the odds?
It has to be slim. The odds have to be slim.
So could we take one step back?
Okay.
How did you end up in state prison?
In 2012, between, I would say, the end of November and the middle of January, I'd gotten 5 DUIs and a criminal trespassing charge.
You got 5 DWIs in that short time period?
Yep.
And all right, let's say we're at DWI 3 within, what, 2 months or something like that?
No, I got them all in 45 days.
What?
Oh, yeah.
You had 5 DWIs in 45 days. What was the judge saying every time you were going and being arraigned?
Nobody knew. I wasn't being arraigned. Like, this is what happened. The system wasn't catching up with each other. So, like, the first one happens, right? My mom won't come and pick me up. God love her. She doesn't come and pick me up. They put me in jail for my first one, which is, like, unheard of. They let me out on Monday because, of course, I go in on a Friday night. They let me out on Monday, right? I proceed to get the other ones, but I haven't been convicted for that first one. So nobody's seeing that, right? So I didn't technically get put in handcuffs until the 5th one. After the 5th one, technically, because the police ended up figuring it out. I'm from, like I said, a small town. Everybody knows everyone. One night I go to a drinking establishment, one that is familiar with my mother because she also goes there. And I don't have my ID. I don't know where my ID is. They ask for it, and I'm immediately like, okay. I try and, like, steal a friend's ID and go and present it to them. They're like, this is not you. I was like, all right. So I take a random stranger's drink off their table, and I book it out the back door while the bar calls the police. And they know where I live because they know my mom. So the police show up to my house, and then that's when they take me in. And that's where I stay until they try and get me onto DUI court.
How long were you in state prison for?
State prison, actually, so what happens is I failed DUI court miserably, and they resentence me. They give me 2 to 5 years, but they tell me that I can do their boot camp program that is also through state prison. It's only a 6-month program, but you have to stay in the county until the state run happens, and then you have to go through classification, which is at Muncie, and then you can go to the boot camp. So between the county and then the end of the boot camp, it was probably like close to a year and a half.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get out, you start going to meetings, you end up getting sober for 8 months, you meet this guy, end up relapsing with the guy. Were you pregnant?
No.
By then? Okay.
No.
So then I don't want to spoil the story then. Now you go to this other bougie facility.
Yeah.
And AMA.
Yep.
Take us, what was your journey right when you AMA? Did you start going to meetings? What did that look like?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I went back to the recovery house that I had been in prior to going. Me and the boyfriend get back together after he gets out. That recovery house, the house president, for those of you who aren't familiar, like, recovery houses have one sole individual that might have the most time in the house, and they are given authority over the house. And so this lady, she and I started to not get along. Her boyfriend was beating her up. I was like, I saw him, like, come through our backyard. I called the owner, who then called her. She got upset about it. Anyway, I had to leave because she told the owner that I lied, and I was just trying to start something. I was like, okay, fine. So I end up on a whim calling this guy, Bob Allen, who owns a nonprofit called Life's Beacon, where he focuses primarily on taking men who are coming out of state prison and county jail. However, at the time, he had 3 women. And so I knew it was a long shot, but I was like, let me just see. And so I call him, I go over there, he interviews me, and then we end up spending like 4 hours together. He takes me around to pick up the guys from work, I guess to figure out like what kind of person I am. And then he ends up taking me in. At around, I would say between 4 and 6 months, I found out in October. So however far October is from May, that's when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. And that really, between that and meeting Bob, those are the 2 like defining moments for like me actually getting sober and staying sober.
So it was with the guy you had originally relapsed with.
Correct.
That you were pregnant with his child.
Yes.
Okay. Is he using at this point?
No.
He's back in the program,
Yes.
clean and sober,
Yes.
working a program?
Yes. When I break the news to him, because as you can imagine, it wasn't planned. And for whatever reason, and I've noticed this, the fellas don't really take that news when it's not planned very well. And he was no exception. I would say maybe 2 weeks after I tell him, he works for a moving company. They're doing a job in New York. And he relapses. He's worked for this moving company for 10 years, so the owner of it is very familiar with his
antics.
Yes. So he tells the other guys, he's like, leave him up there. And I am furious when I find this out. So I have to I'm pregnant at this time, mind you. I'm hacking his bank account to figure out where he is staying at in New York. They said it's I believe it was a Hilton. I know that it's in whatever area in New York City. I don't remember which area, but for the story, we're going to say it was Manhattan. He's in a Hilton in Manhattan. That's all I know. Well, go ahead and guess how many of those there are. And I'm calling every single one saying, hey, can you patch me through to such and such's room? Until I finally find the one where they patch me through, right? I don't drive at the time because I have 5 DUIs. I get one of the guys from the house. I'm like, here, I'll pay for the tolls. I'll pay for your cigarettes, whatever you need. But can you please drive me to Manhattan so we can find him and bring him back home? And that's exactly what we do.
You get to the Hilton.
We get to the Hilton.
What happens? I got to know. You go to the Hilton. You find out what room he's in. You go. You knock on his door.
Well, I knock on a door, and a trans woman answers it, actually. And I'm like, I was like, have you seen this guy? And she's like, yeah, he's in that room over there. And I'm like, okay. So we bang on it. He doesn't answer. He doesn't answer. He doesn't answer. Finally, he answers. I open up the door, and it's a mess. Puke everywhere. Empties everywhere. Because it had been almost a week before I had gotten to the point where I had figured out where he was. So we get him in the car. We bring him home. The next morning, I have to work a 10-hour shift at Dunkin' Donuts. So I go in. While I'm there, I get a phone call from Bob because I had gotten my daughter's father a bed at that house. And he says, hey, we found Mike on the floor this morning. He wasn't really breathing that well, so they took him to the hospital. So after my 10-hour shift, I go to the hospital. And they tell me basically, at some point during the night, he had thrown up, asphyxiated on his own vomit, and they had to put him in an induced coma for 2 weeks. So it was quite the rocky road. And that would be the pattern for the next, until present day. In fact, he's currently in rehab as we speak.
Wow.
Every 3 to 6 months, we do this little dance. And, yeah.
Are you guys still together?
No.
Okay.
I decided to discontinue the relationship when my daughter was almost 2. At that point, I was just like, this is not healthy for anyone. So he had to go. I will say this. We get along. I get very, in a treatment setting, when I'm working like one-on-one with an individual, I can be so understanding, so loving, so kind, you know? But with him, the moment I find out he's relapsed again, I immediately get filled with rage. Almost instantaneously. And it's a hard thing to get past, but when he is out of rehab, regardless of if he's at a recovery house, an apartment, whatever the case may be, if he is sober, he is able to see her on the designated days that we have. It's tough navigating being a parent.
It is tough navigating life. Forget being a parent. I mean, for people in sobriety, you talked about the first year before. The first year is like a pink cloud, right? It's new. You're going to meetings. You're meeting all these new people. Then it's life on life's terms. My last episode, the guest had 4 people die in his life in sobriety in like a year and a half to 2 year time period. Yeah. And he got through it sober. You constantly going through that vicious cycle while you're sober with your child's father.
Yeah.
It's not like you could just get rid of your child's father. Like, you guys are together. You guys are forever. You'll be in contact forever because you have your child together. So it's not like you could have just wrote him off and you tried as a parent to stay together. It sounds like you had 2 kids during that time.
That is very much what it was like. But I can say what they want as far as, you know, what keeps them sober. But in those moments, right, I don't believe that if I was not pregnant, that I would have. I don't know, but I can almost guarantee I probably wouldn't have. It's like the moment I found out, and I know this isn't true for everybody, but for me, that's what it was. Like, from the moment I found out, it just like completely changed like the level of seriousness of which I approached everything. And so even after she was born and he was doing this, like, it was like, what could I do? Like, I'm it. Like, it's just me. So I truly believe that everything happens for a reason. I believe that we meet certain people throughout our lives that change the trajectory of where we're going. And that can be good or bad. You have to use your discernment. But in this time period of my life, I feel like I had all the right people around me, and I had something that meant a lot to me, and it trumped my codependency.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
So do you think God, if you believe in God or a higher power, put that child in your life for a reason?
Absolutely. 100%. You did it twice.
No, in stories, you hear when people can't do for themselves, there's some kind of power greater than themselves that intervene. And for whatever reason, things just happen a certain way. And in your case, you had a child in your belly, like that you were. If you decided to relapse, not only would the baby, you know, you shouldn't be drinking alcohol while pregnant or doing drugs, whatever, but then they would have no parents.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe that was that supposed to be like that for a reason. And so in and out, this guy's in and out of treatment facility, relapses for, 2 years. Your daughter's 2 at this point. When do you really reinvent yourself in sobriety? And what did that look like?
So, remember Bob? Bob bought a house that he was making a women's house. He had converted into a 2-unit so that I could have the baby downstairs, and the other girls could be upstairs. I have Piper. I would say Piper's between 3 and 6 months old. When Bob gives me a call and he's like, we need to have a talk, So I go over there and he was like, he's going through his own life situation at that time. He's like, I can't handle the women's house. Like, will you take over the lease? And so I take this house over. I take over the lease. And it takes me 1.5 years to do it, but I do eventually purchase that property. Within my first year, as we covered, I get pregnant. I get into a relationship, I get pregnant. Before I even find out I'm pregnant, though. So we're saying between, we'll say October, 6 months from May. I don't know. Before I find out I'm pregnant, I've already enrolled in school. And I've decided I'm going to get my master's degree. Not at that point, I didn't decide it. That would come later, but that's what ended up happening. So I go back to school. I have a baby. And I feel, and I haven't quite figured it out yet, but I'm starting to figure out that I can do it on my own, which is huge. I can't even express how huge that is when you get to that point where you actually like are confident in your own abilities to do something. I don't have a license. I do not have a license. I'm getting to work. I'm getting home. I'm going to school. I'm getting home. I'm taking care of my daughter. I eventually do. Him giving me that house gave me the ability to not have to work anymore. And so I was able to be a stay-at-home mom with my daughter for the first 18 months of her life because of that house. And that never would have happened if I hadn't gone there, if I had never met him. I eventually get my degree, and I get a job in the field working as an admissions coordinator of all things, which is not what I want to do. That's not what I want to do is I want to be a therapist. That's what I want. That's the end game at that point. But I get this admissions job, and it's for a company, and 6 months into that job, they shut down. So I get another job at a rehab that was based out in Florida, had started a new facility in Pennsylvania. I do admissions for them. And then 6 months later, they shut down. And at that point, I'm starting to feel like I should probably give up. But in 2019, I get a job with the place that I currently work at right now. So that was after I had gotten my associate's degree. I'm in school for my bachelor's, but I get a job there as like an intake person. And at this point, I have already committed to a direction, and I really truly believe that this is the direction that I should go. But what ends up happening is this is so bad. I work at this rehab for like almost a year. And every year we have to volunteer at the York Fair, which is like, it's actually a really big fair. It's kind of a big deal if you've never heard of it. But I go there, I sit at the table. The CEO of the company that I work for shows up. And we start talking. We're like walking around. He wants me to take like pictures for like social media or whatever. Cool. I send him the pictures to his phone number after the night is over, and we start talking. And then eventually we start dating secretly. And then it's not a secret anymore because of me, you know? And I don't know it at the time, but I have found myself in yet another situation that I just had to put my hands in it. You know, I just had to make this thing happen, do this thing, and it just ended up not playing out so well.
How long did you guys date for?
Oh, well, that relationship ended. Technically, it ended in January.
Of this year?
Yeah.
Is that who your second child is with?
Yep.
Wow. So you still work for the same company?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then you guys got to be getting along if he's the father of your second child and you're the CEO of your company.
We do now. He did end up stepping down. He still owns it, but he did end up stepping down out of that role. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anybody else out there had a terrible 2023, but your girl had a terrible 2023 into, well, no, I guess it was all 2023. I locate some information online that would allude to the fact that in the 5 years that I was with my son's father, that none of it was monogamous. Maybe we should present this proof to him and see what he does with it. because up until this point, he's proven that he is a gaslighter, a liar, like is unwilling to take like accountability for his actions and is unwilling to like show up in the relationship as I believe that he should. And so the things that I found did not look very good for him. And so when we had the conversation, he was like, well, I was like, we can break up mutually and it'll be fine. He was like, well, I think we should go to therapy. I was like, okay, we can go to therapy. That is an alternative option. But if we go to therapy and you string me along for another ride of no monogamy and no showing up in the way that you should, it's not going to go well. And so he chooses the therapy option. And so we do that for, I don't know, I think it was like almost 8 months, 6 to 8 months we go to therapy. And throughout therapy, I make sure to let him know, like, hey, just so you know, if I find anything, because obviously at this point, now I have the passwords to everything, whereas before I was not allowed to have the passwords to anything, which should have been a red flag, I know, but come on. Now I have the passwords to everything. I have like something on his phone where I can see in real time like the stuff that's coming on and going out.
Holy shit.
I know. And so you would think he's definitely not going to do anything, right? Except for, so anyway, periodically throughout our therapy sessions, I would mention in front of our therapist, like, hey, just so you know, if I find anything else, anything, I'm going to put those screenshots of the stuff that I found out for the world to see. It seemed like everybody understood what I was saying. Every time I brought it up, okay, we understand. All right, just so we're on the same page, because one thing about me is like, I don't want to have my time wasted. I'm okay that, I found out, 4 years in, it sucks, but I'm willing to part ways right now and we'll call it even. We will never speak of this again. But you wanted to go to therapy. Anyways, so naturally, I guess, he goes down to Florida to present some wrestling thing. He owns a bunch of other companies, too. It's not just, anyway, he's presenting a wrestling thing in Florida for 2 days. And at this point, everything seems to be going really well. I'm monitoring everything as I need to, and everything seems fine. Great. He comes back from Florida, and I wake up before him, and I think to myself, I'm just going to look at his phone. Just make sure everything is okay. Because one thing that I can't see on this app is emails. So I open up his phone, and the first thing I find is like a string of emails with someone that he shouldn't be talking to, with his position. He shouldn't be talking to this person, and he definitely shouldn't be trying to like set up a date with this person.
At the company.
Worse. So, I find this, I take a screenshot, and I proceed to do exactly what I told him I was going to do. That was January, and that is when our relationship ended. So naturally, we don't get along right away. Everybody's pissed at everybody. But 2 weeks before I find this, well, actually not 2 weeks before I find this, actually, when I found the original thing that pushed us into therapy.
A year before or something.
Yeah. 2 weeks before that, my rental that Bob had given me catches fire. And then 2 weeks later, I find the initial thing. I go to therapy. We're still in therapy. August hits. And, well, technically April hits. And my mom calls me to tell me, something's not right. So me and my brother, we drive down there, and we discover that she's got this terminal brain tumor. So in the midst of having to coordinate with the insurance company about the fire, in the midst of navigating therapy, I'm also now having to sell my mom's house, move her in next door because we live in a semi-detached home. So the other half we moved my mom into. I'm having to coordinate care, figure out power of attorney, all that stuff. And it's a lot. But after I have my son, I stop going to AA. Not because I want to, but because like his father is so filled with self that when I want to go to a meeting, like he can't possibly stay home and watch the children
By himself
for an hour and a half to allow for driving time. He couldn't possibly do it. So, but spoiler alert, he's doing it now.
Oh.
All this is going on. I'm not going to AA. I don't have an act. I know what the solution is. I know what works for me. I am actively choosing not to do it, but also like not in a position to do it either. So I'm not exactly pleasant to be around. I am like, given everything that's going on in conjunction with like not having a solution, I am just like on the edge, on the precipice of like a mental breakdown is what it felt. I probably had one, to be honest. I think the moment I put that stuff online, I just cracked. I was like, fuck you, fuck her, and just whatever. I was like, I don't even care how it looks. I was like, I'm so sick and tired of people reaching out to you saying, oh, I want to be just like you, when they don't even know who they want to be just like. So I'm going to show them. Doing that created a layer of accountability, is what I believe is what it honestly did. But I can also see how people would view it as someone who's unhinged, someone who's crazy, you know, whatever the case may be. And there were people out there who definitely thought that, I'm sure. But for me, it was like probably one of the most empowering things I've ever done.
Who gives a fuck what anyone else has to say? I mean, listen, it sounds, if a woman came to me and I think you giving him that opportunity after finding out for 5 years he wasn't with you alone, I think that's more than, I mean, beyond nice, loving, empathetic, wanting to stick it out with your partner, with your son's father, giving it a shot. And you also said, listen, if you don't want to do it, then we'll just part ways and it'll be a mutual thing. But he was the one who said, no, I want to continue to do this. And he knew what the stakes were. Mm-hmm. And I like how you mentioned accountability, because my self-worth sometimes, I will let someone beat that shit into the ground until there is some kind of accountability, because I can't hold myself accountable.
Yeah.
So I understand where you're coming from. Now, from the sounds of it, I'm going to let you call him it, not me. I don't know if it's true, but was he a narcissist?
You know, me and the therapist who were saying believe that might be the case.
Okay, so then if he is a narcissist, what is it like to be with a narcissist? And what are some of the signs? And what piece of advice would you have for someone that's in a relationship with someone who is a narcissist?
So first off, I want to preface this by saying that this is not a social media buzzword that I'm going to be describing to you, like, because I understand that it has gotten thrown around so loosely that people will literally roll their eyes at it, right? What it's like is, at first, very charismatic, like very like magnetic. Like, it is insane that the person that I created in my mind that he was is not who he was. And I'm not saying he's a bad person now, because he's still going to therapy. He's still seeing the same therapist twice a week. I had to go to a different therapist, and that's fine, you know. The first year that we were officially, or the first year between talking until we officially started dating, it was me finding out different pieces of information from other people, right? And then presenting this information to him, thinking, okay, well, if I present it to you, like, you're going to tell me the truth, because I expect myself out of everybody. I am a terrible liar, and I get really resentful with people that lie to me. And I think it's because I can't do it. So anyway, side quest, sorry. I present him with this information, which his friend had told me that when we started talking, his friend was like, well, you know he has a girlfriend. I was like, actually, no, I didn't know that. That's so interesting that you mentioned that. And so I present that information to him. He was like, well, him and I haven't been close in a while. Like, he doesn't know, like, what my life is like. And, like, social media, you couldn't find anything. From the outside, it looked as if he was telling the truth, right? Well, his girlfriend lived with him. So when we would see each other, he would drive to my house, right? Because we're just in the getting to know each other stages, you know, like it didn't seem odd to me at the time. But every month, once or twice a month, I would bring this information up again. Like, are you sure? And he was like, no, it's a roommate situation. How many times do I have to tell you? Like, this is where, like, heavy gaslighting, to the point where, like, at the end of the conversation, you will find yourself apologizing for something like you know to be true. In your gut, you know it. You don't have any actual proof of it. And this goes on for a year, where they call it crazy making, where they will literally make you feel and make you seem like you are the crazy person in this situation. What ends up happening is I eventually request his girlfriend on Snapchat. And the very first snap that I see is a picture of him with, like, hearts around it. Da, da, da. I screenshot it knowing she can see that I screenshot it, and I send it to her. And I'm like, you know, now would be a really good time for you to be transparent. And his response, again, and this is like a really good indicator of, like, the level of accountability with proof he was willing to take in that moment, which was, if you want me to be transparent, the truth is she believes that we're in a relationship, but we are not. Let that one marinate, because I still think on it, and I'm like, oh, my God. So I tell him, okay, well, funny story. You have a week to tell her what you've been up to, or I'm going to show her. Because this whole year that you've been gaslighting me, like, I've been taking screenshots of what you've been telling me your relationship with her is. So here's your 7 days. Like, go tell her the truth. On the 7th day, it comes, you know, because in natural, like, wait till the very last minute fashion, that's what we're going to do. On the 7th day, I wake up. God didn't rest, and neither did I. You know what I'm saying? So I think to myself, Jamie, even if he does tell her the truth, like, what version of the truth is he going to tell her? So I made my mind up. I decided, okay. And so I took her email off of her social media, and I type up a comprehensive essay as to the timeline of everything that's happened, accompanied with the screenshots for proof. And I send it to her, thinking that she's never going to see it, because the email on my social media, I've never checked a day in my life. I'm like, what are the chances? So that night, he tells her, she storms out, apparently, allegedly, this is what happened. She storms out. The next morning, I get a response email. And he stops talking to me. He's no longer he's upset that I sent this email. And I was like, okay. All right. And, like, the idiot that I am in that moment, like, I feel like I'm in such a vulnerable position, because when you engage with a narcissist or anyone that's got an avoidant attachment style and you have an anxious attachment style, what happens is when they have an elongated period of time where they're coming close and then pulling away, when they pull away, it creates, like, a stress response. But when they come close, it's a dopamine hit. So when he pulled away for that week or however long it was, like, I was actually really going through it, even though the evidence throughout that year was showing me what that was going to look like if I continued to move forward. And that's exactly what happened, you know? That's what it's like, just an emotional roller coaster where you constantly feel like you got to walk on eggshells. Because you are the problem, but you're actually not. It's the weirdest. Have you ever?
No, I have showcased narcissistic tendencies years ago.
Really?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah, being fully vulnerable and putting myself out there. Yeah, I've like gaslighted girls. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't do that shit. I can't. Because, well, God has a funny way of working. I mean, if you want to roll love bombing into that,
Oh, yeah.
because again, you said narcissist, that term tends to be thrown around a lot. But let's just roll it all up into narcissism. Love bombing, all that stuff. Yeah, I used to do all that shit when I was younger, like in my 20s and stuff, and just not give a shit. Yeah, it was super disrespectful. And then I've had some stuff happen to me where I was on the receiving end of it, and it does not feel very fucking good. So God has a funny way of working, and today I just try to be honest, and it's just easier that way. Like, I don't want to be... You want to know what it is? So with narcissism, it's funny. Like, in the beginning, you said he came on so strong, and I bet you if you gave him a lie detector test about like his feelings towards you, he probably would have passed. He was being serious. And I think it is just the lack of self-worth for themselves creates this atmosphere where if they don't even love themselves or like themselves, if matter of fact they hate themselves, how are you going to be empathetic towards anyone? Like, if you can't even be empathetic towards yourself. Well, I mean, look, some people are empathetic towards others, but not empathetic because they're hard on themselves. But if you for me, I noticed my insecurity was so deep rooted, I would override with narcissism and like narcissistic tendencies.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because for him, he and the therapist and I have discussed that we came to the conclusion that he is more under the umbrella of a passive-aggressive covert narcissist, which is different from like an overt narcissist.
Your traditional narcissist?
Your traditional one where it's like very much like...
Aggressive?
They mask that those insecurities, that like lack of self-esteem, they'll lack it with like over-presenting themselves or their accomplishments.
Yeah, that's
right?
me.
Okay. He actually has accomplished a lot. You know, it's not these things that he's embellishing on. Like he took work to the point where that's where he found his self-worth in. It was never like going in. It was always like going out. But he was passive-aggressive with it in the way that it was very stealthy. It wasn't something that like you could pick up on right away. Like, I'm sure like for someone who's like outward with it, it's probably something you could see. You'd be like, oh, that guy's kind of full of himself, but all right.
Yeah. Big ego.
Some of us, there are days when I have a big ego, you know, and I feel like maybe we all, to a degree, have narcissistic tendencies.
Yeah.
I do feel that way.
I would agree.
That's just like with the age that we live in is what I believe that comes with.
I would agree.
So our relationship is a lot better now. He has improved by leaps and bounds. Like when I say when I took that jab at him earlier of, well, now he does watch the kids on his own. Now he is like volunteering. Like on days where like it's not his day, I'll be like, hey, like I would really like to do X, Y, and Z. Like, are you okay with taking them for a couple of hours? He's not said no, hasn't said no once since January. And that is like huge. So it has been, I believe it all happened for a reason, right? Like we all in that situation, right? Like I believe that he needed that experience to work on himself, to actually be serious about working with a therapist and wanting to change these things instead of when it was just us going. I truly believe that he felt like it's what he had to do, not what he wanted to do. And now I believe it's what he wants to do.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you doing today to keep your sobriety at its peak?
Oh my gosh. So obviously that catalyst, that major life event, like shook me pretty bad.
Catapulted you right back in, right?
I wish I could say that, right? That happened in January. I didn't go back to AA until end of March, beginning of April. And I said this during my story when I celebrated, and I'll say it again, like, I wish I would have done it sooner. I wish I would have, because, like, I thought about it, and, like, when I was helping take care of my mom, like, during those moments where, like, I feel like the version of me that she got isn't the version of me that I wanted her to have. Like, I wish I could have been more present and less on edge, because I was so short, restless, irritable, and discontent. That's exactly what I was. And there's no better way to describe it. And unfortunately, like, it's a guilt piece for me. It's a guilt piece I've had to, like, work through that, like, unfortunately, like, yes, she died. But here's the thing. I was sober. She died with me sober. She died with me being able to see her grandchildren the last few months that she was alive. I was physically there because she lived 2 hours away. So, like, she only got to see them really on holidays. So I believe that was, like, the best thing that she could have gotten. But currently, I am back in AA. I have surrounded myself with women who I actually, like, want what they have. And not just in that capacity, because here's the weird piece. And follow me here, because there are some other things, like, obviously, like, when my mom passes away, me and my brother split her 401k and her life insurance policy. We both split it. I put mine into 2 properties. I start my own company. I would market it towards helping individuals who have criminal records be able to obtain, like, decent rentals for, like, an affordable price, which is unheard of in the area that I live in, because rent's getting crazy. Probably everywhere, but that's what I'm trying to do with that. I go back to AA. The first night I'm there, I have to take my kids to the babysitting room. They don't do this in every AA group, but in York, I'm telling you, the recovery is different. There's babysitting at some meetings. So my now sponsor is working the babysitting room. I go in there. I remember her from before when I very first got sober, and I ask her, like, hey, will you be my sponsor? She's like, absolutely. So she then connects me. She actually encourages me to go get my real estate license, like, to take the courses, all of that. And I'm like, I just dumped $70,000 into getting my master's degree in social work. Like, I obviously jumped over some things. Like, I was a therapist. I did reach that goal. I got the bachelor's. I got the master's degree. Like, I got all of these external things, and I was still miserable because, you know, I wasn't doing what I knew anyway. So she encourages me to go get my real estate license. I start taking these classes without knowing if I can even have it because I have a criminal record. So I could finish it all, and they could be like, actually, you know what?
Nope.
Not for you. But anyway, so she introduces me to this other lady who's a part of this company called Girls Buy Houses Too. And their whole thing is, like, helping people. Like, they're coming from a helping place. Like, it sounds like it's an investment property type of business, but they want to empower women through the company, which I think is cool. And so it's just all working out where, like, now I have this whole other group of women who aren't even a part of AA. I mean, some of them are, but most of them aren't. And they all are, like, powerhouses. Like, they're doing crazy stuff, like renovating a house by themselves, flipping it by themselves, and then reselling it, which I think is so cool. The success that I have right now, in short, is due to having my own goals, being my own independent person, not putting all of my personality into one basket where I go around just announcing that I'm in AA and I'm a recovering alcoholic and all of that. Like, that's not all that I am. And that's what I believe is really important for everyone else, too, to realize, like, that's not all that you are. Like, you can be a lot more.
If you had one piece of advice for the Jamie right before you got sober, who was in that madness and crazy lifestyle, what would it be?
The advice, I guess, would be to pay attention to who you meet. Don't sweat the small stuff for sure. And the consequences you're about ready to experience are going to be shitty. They're going to suck. But if you walk through them, the life you're going to have is going to be crazy. You're never going to believe it. You're never going to believe it.
I agree with you 100%. There was so much fear that kept me from getting sober because I knew I had to deal with consequences. And I didn't want to take accountability. I was so scared. And it was also even detox. Like, I don't even want to detox because it's going to be so bad. Like, all of these things that were built up in my head to be so bad. Listen, they're bad, but you can get through them sober.
That's what I'm saying. It's like just, and even like after, like the major life events, like the losses, the bumps in the road, whatever, as long as you walk through them and don't try and find a way around them, because you'll drive yourself nuts trying to find a way around them. Just walk through them. Because I believe that if I had never just accepted what it was, like truly accepted it and walked through it, I probably wouldn't be sober.
You took accountability.
That's what I'm saying. I think that that's a huge piece of it.
Huge piece. I agree.
Just being able to say, like, you know what? I fucked up. Here are the things that I've done. This is who I am now. And take me or leave me. And give people the option. Be transparent. Be honest. Have integrity. You know, all of those things. If you can just do that, that alone will make your life so much better.
100%. Well, Jamie, thank you. This was absolutely amazing. Your story is going to help a lot of people. So I do appreciate you coming on and making the drive.
Oh, yeah, no worries. And if I sounded a little insane through the son's father part, I do apologize. It's still a little fresh, less than a year old. So please just, give me some grace.
I will co-sign her sanity. She looks very sane. She's been acting very sane off camera. We're good. The pulse check is okay.
Thank you.
Thank you again.